My name is Omolara Balogun. I work here at the West Africa Civil Society Institute as the heads of policy influence and advocacy. I agree with my colleagues that this is going to be an interesting conversation, particularly because of the time we are in. And I believe that every one of us who've joined this conversation is because we have one connections or passion, interest in democratic development of our region. And at this point, we have so many concerning issues to continue to discuss, deliberate, and of course, find the best strategy to address them, depending on where we sit and what we do. So I'd like to welcome every one of us to the conversation on behalf of my director, Dr. Nana Fajino, who is unable to join us today. I'm sure she may check in at a time, but really a big welcome to every one of you. And to our speakers, I will be reading their bio very shortly, but as a way of setting context, I think West Africa at this particular time, we stand at a pivotal crossroad when it comes to our democracy. One of the regions that over the years has experienced different levels of turbulence, democratic turbulence. And at some point, I think between 2010 and 2017, we had a bit of crisis, democratic crisis. And between 2016 and 2020, just after the removal of Yahya Jammeh, things were a bit stable until 2020, and then we had another roller coaster. At this point, our region is now grappling with a disturbing pattern of democratic backsliding, which threatens some of the gains that we have made in the last decades. Since 2020 specifically, we've experienced a number of coups and counter coups in countries such as Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and even some countries not so far away from West Africa, Gabon, also had, disrupted constitutional rule, which continues to weaken civilian governance. This, sudden power shift has been accompanied by series of authoritarian tactics, even in countries that supposedly operate democratic rules. We've seen electoral manipulations, suppression of dissent, judicial manipulation as well, shrinking civic space, media repression. And we see this across the countries, not only the countries that are currently under military rule. But what is most important, which we are going to be, diving deeper into in our conversation today, are a pack, of electoral calendars that we have in 2025 in West Africa. We're expecting 4 of our countries to hold elections. Guinea-Bissau is set for elections in September, Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon in October, and Guinea, that is Guinea-Conakry, is also set to hold elections in December. The stakes has never been higher than we have it now. So as we, look forward to these electoral processes, some of the signals that we are seeing in the context, at the various contexts, includes situations of questions around institutional integrity, which has been recorded to be highly compromised in places like Conakry, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, all the countries. In Cameroon specifically, we have a long-standing Anglophone crisis in the Northwest and Southwest region, which continuously, which continues to obstruct access to polls and has to a very large extent, disenfranchised many communities and continues to fall instabilities. In Cote d'Ivoire, you will agree with me that we have in recent time witnessed systematic exclusions of potential oppositions, and the constitution continued to be reinterpreted over and over to justify, of course, some personal interest. And generally, across these countries and across the region, the continent, civic space is being narrowed at an alarming rate. We are seeing increasing repressions of media, human rights, and pro-democracy, actors facing growing threats. And on the flip side, we are also seeing a lot of digital repression, especially where young people have taken to the digital platforms to also make demand for democratic governance, inclusive governance, participatory governance, if you like. We are seeing that space also being constructed, restricted over and over. This varying dynamics continues to weaken, public trust in, democratic institutions, the principles of it, and to a very large extent in this part of the world, continues to fuel democratic apathy, where young people, electorates are not interested in participating in electoral democracy, for example, or even contributing to governance or even speaking up. We are seeing a lot of that, especially from section of societies who have been marginalized over the years, And this conversation is quite important, not only for us as WACC, but for the constituency that we all stand to represent, West Africa, our citizens. We have seen a number of actions and inactions from our regional economic bloc, the ECOWAS, and we've also read a few statements from the African Union and other development partners on how, democratic retrogressions continue to impede our development sustainability. So today we are going to be unpacking some of these conversations, particularly how, some of the structural factors that continue to undermine democracy and electoral credibility in West Africa, and I dare say in Africa. No doubt democracy is under global threats because even one of the foremost democratic, climb, United States of America is also facing, its own ups, and downs, if you like. So today we would be highlighting some of the roles that civil society and other democracy actors can, employ to safeguard what we have left. In a recent Afrobarometer report, one of the findings states that at least 42% of West African citizens still prefers, democracy as a form of government, which means that a critical mass still believe in democracy despite the different injuries it's experiencing now. So how do we take it on from here? How do we restore, how do we restore democracy? How do we safeguard what we have? How do we rebuild, reinvent, revigorate, if you like, through various interventions from actors like civil society, activists, human rights protectors, pro-democracy actors across the region. We will also be looking at how we can, strengthen the effectiveness of our electoral bodies, the EMBs, electoral commissions, and different actors that contribute to the electoral affairs in our countries. And we would also love to hear from our speakers and every one of us here who would be willing to share insight on how to rebuild, trust in democracy and how to strengthen our resilience across the region. So these are some of the conversation we'll be having today. And I hope this few remarks has been able to set the context, for this conversation. We have a number of colleagues, speakers that will be contributing to this conversation. And in no particular order, I will just read, a brief from their bios that I have here. So I have my friend and sister, Funto Akinduro, who is the senior advisor in the Africa and West Asia Regional Program of International IDEA. She's based in Addis Ababa. She's worked in the field of elections and democracy for over 2 decades, focusing on electoral assessment, project design, management, advocacy, research, and training. Funto is the regional thematic lead on electoral processes. In this role, she supports the Institute's regional and country programs through designing and managing election support projects, contributing to knowledge production, and she manages the Institute's support to electoral management bodies and civil society organizations across Africa. Funto, thank you so much for joining us. I also have here a friend and sister, Aisha Tambajan. She's the Senior Program Manager at Momentum, a leading global initiative on equity, accountability, and resilience. Aisha has a background in governance, civic engagement, and policy advocacy. She's worked across West Africa and the diaspora to strengthen democratic institutions and civic space. She is particularly passionate about advancing inclusive governance through ecosystem-centered approaches that strengthens institutions, elevates civic voices, and promotes accountability. Aisha, thank you so much for joining us. We also have on the list of speakers today, Dr. Faya Lansana Milimoni. Please pardon me in case I mispronounced your name. My apologies. He is the only politician in our midst, but he's also an educational expert. His professional background is marked by significant international experience, serving as a consultant for the World Bank, a pension manager at the Georgetown University, and a lecturer researcher in Guinea. He started his political career in the 90s with the Guinean People's Party and later playing a strategic role in the new generation for the Republic as a campaign director and vice president. He was a presidential candidate in the 2015 elections and is currently preparing his candidacy for the upcoming presidential elections in Guinea. Doc, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We also have on the list Dr. Ngala Desmond. Dr. Ngala is a frontline advocacy for free speech and fair elections in Africa's most volatile political landscapes. He is the founder of Civic Watch and the country project manager for Defy 8 Now Cameroon. He leads initiatives that counter electoral violence, hate speech, information disorder, and digital repression. He has a PhD in conflict resolution and a decade of experience as a political and data analyst. Doc, thank you so much for joining us and welcome. And the last but not the least is Miss Edith. Edith is the president of Alternative Citoyen Ivorian. That's Alternative Citizens in Ivory Coast. She is a sociologist and a prominent activist within Ivorian civil society. She is known for her unwavering commitment to social justice, human rights, and democracy. She's led many protests, especially against third term bid in 2020, and was imprisoned twice for a civic engagement. Edith is the leader of Gilead Orange movement in Côte d'Ivoire. She currently heads the Alternative Citoyen Ivoirien and the Coalition for convened Côte d'Ivoire. Edith, thank you so much for joining us. Without taking much of our time, we'd like to go straight into the conversation. And I'm going to start with you, Funto. I mean, we are all familiar with the work that International IDEA does across the globe around electoral governance, democracy generally. And like I said earlier, West Africa has particularly witnessed a very, very concerning democracy changes since 2020, from coups to constitutional amendment, to tenure elongation, violence, etc., etc. From where you sit, how would you describe, the general state of democracy in West Africa from the work that you do? And how do you think this current state will shape the forthcoming elections across the four countries that we're examining today? Funke, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Omolara, and thanks to colleagues at WACSI for having me at this webinar. Well, you've given a very, very good background in terms of where we are in the West Africa region. Quite some interesting developments, as you've discussed. And the region continues to show, a very interesting mix of countries as far as our democratic trajectories, reflect. So you're looking at the democracies that have shown some good stability. And I mean, last year's outcomes in places like Ghana, Liberia, the year before that, were very welcome developments. And at the same time, you have countries that have shown quite discouraging developments and almost, should I say, stagnation. I wouldn't say retrogression, but stagnation. Countries like Sierra Leone, countries like Nigeria. And this is in the broader, space of looking at democracy as a whole broad spectrum, not just electoral processes. And then you have countries that have had stalled transitions, as you've mentioned in the last 2-3 years, the different coups. But beyond just the events or the happenings around the unconstitutional changes of government, interestingly, the transition processes in these countries have been relatively slower than we've seen in previous times. The regional integration has regressed considerably. And ECOWAS, as a regional bloc, which used to be Africa's foremost, now is becoming. Yeah, so I was just making, that broad overview in terms of where we are completely, across. And you have fragile states like Guinea-Bissau, currently under what we call a democratic rule, but its democratic credentials, remain very unstable and fragile. And with the elections now set in November, I mean, these elections were postponed last year with the excuse of logistics challenges, non-availability of budgets to run the elections. Interesting that, but then you look at the other transition countries. Guinea is the only one that has so far now set a date. So generally, broadly speaking, the overview of the state of democracy, in the region, my point really is it's a mixed bag. I don't think I want to put a one-word slant to it. But that said, I don't think West Africa is considerably different from what we see if we shake it across as we go across the continent. Interesting developments that, and quite recently we had a conference where we talked about reimagining democracy, and everyone pointed to the fact that yes, elections are more the procedural aspects of what we call democracy, but what we see today in terms of the manifestations of why are we seeing more stalled transitions, why are we seeing more fragile democracies developing, these are more indicators of the broader questions around the social contract, whether citizens very broadly are feeling that they are part of what we are today calling democracies. And that's why when I talked about countries like Sierra Leone and Nigeria, I said these were countries showing more signs of what I would consider slowing down. I wouldn't say it's complete regression, but slowing down, because when you look at the broad overview of democratic credentials, so whether it's about the civic space, the openness of the civic space, the openness of political competition, and those questions, these countries seem to be going back and forth, and gradually, I would describe what we are seeing in those spaces as stalling. Your question about then how do we see this panning out in the different elections that will be taking place? Guinea-Bissau, Cote d'Ivoire. I hope I haven't left anyone out. Interestingly, for Guinea, it's the only, like I mentioned, the only transition country that has now put a clear date. The referendum will hold in September. And that takes us back to the question I was talking about, the social contract. Are these transitions now moving away from the trend that we've seen before? Everybody just, trying to make a dash towards holding transition elections? Or are we deeply rethinking, to say democracy is about the citizens? What was the basis of our dissatisfaction before that led us to the point where these coups happened? And we saw a whole celebration when these unconstitutional changes of government happened. And I think in the last 2-3 years, we kept interrogating why were these, very clearly celebrated. So Guinea is now at that point where we are now saying a referendum. To what extent have citizens been able to interrogate the content of that? Or are we just holding again this referendum for the purpose of checking the box so that we get to the transition election and then it is, yay, we've gone past one transition, but would we call it a democratic transition? The three countries holding elections are doing so within quite similar spaces. One, and I will just describe them as captured spaces, captured reform processes. The referendum sits within that space. And you yourself talked about continuous reinterpretation of the law as we go along. So captured judiciary, captured reform processes, captured spaces for election management, and then we also see the continued restriction of civic spaces. These four issues, in my opinion, are common across all the countries we're talking about. You look at Cote d'Ivoire, the question of who is eligible to run, and all that. And there has been a judgment as well, by regional courts regarding the question of citizenship and eligibility. More and more, you see a lot of use of the judiciary to define who's a citizen, who's eligible to run in our elections. Our election management bodies, the space for appointing them, the space for giving them the platform to do the freedom and independence to do their work, and more recently is the question of funding these institutions. Guinea-Bissau then comes into view when you talk about the question of funding. Was it sincerely non-availability of budget, or these were motivated by other issues, which we just paint with a brush of operational difficulties getting towards the conduct of an election? I've talked about Guinea-Bissau. I've talked about the operational challenges, but also that has also sat in the space of using the judiciary. We've seen as well the courts, issuing certain pronouncements that have either been interpreted as politically motivated, to uphold the powers of the incumbent. So for me, those four issues affect the elections that we see coming up. And even in countries where there are no elections, these four issues remain relevant to them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Funto. I think you have really helped us to kind of set broader context for this conversation, particularly going over some of the realities. And I pretty appreciate some of the new terminologies that you've used, the stalling, the slower, the fragile. I think it sounds a little more, for lack of a better word, fascinating than the very toned descriptions that we've gotten used to. And for me, I think these are signs of hope that, yeah, these things could, move a little differently the way we all desire it to be. But very quickly, I want to move to Fafa. Fafa is from Guinea. And Guinea is an interesting country right now. Since 2021, that General Doumbouya took office, through the barrels of the gun. The regime has set in different motions of reform, some of which Funto just alluded to, including the constitutional referendum that we are expecting in another couple of weeks. But you, as someone within the context, how would you describe the kind of transformations, political, civic transformation that has taken place in Guinea since military took over in 2021? And just to be very direct, do you think from where you sit and the kind of engagement you're having in the country, do you think Guineans are ready for elections? What are the general perceptions around issues like voters registers that have been prepared, the constitution of electoral commissions, the electoral bodies, the insecurities? I mean, we've read recent reports about the borders and the impact of the CVEs, that is extremism, and local political parties, civil society. What are the general perceptions of this, classes of actors towards the forthcoming elections? Are we ready? And what changes has, the regime actually taken on in the past 4 years? What transformation has happened since one of the excuses for taking power was actually to bring about certain reforms? Can you just enlighten us from where you sit? Please, you have 5 minutes. Fafa.
Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité à cette conversation. Pour vous donner une idée de ce qui est en train de se passer dans mon pays, la Guinée, depuis bientôt 4 ans, je vais structurer ma communication en commençant par vous donner quelques promesses qui avaient été faites par la junte militaire lorsqu'elle est arrivée. Je vais aller très rapidement par rapport à cela. Il a été question d'engager une lutte contre la corruption et les détournements de deniers publics. La junte a constaté qu'en Guinée, l'administration publique était trop politisée et qu'il fallait la dépolitiser. On a constaté que la justice vacillait, il faut en faire une boussole. Le respect des libertés, des droits devait être de mise et qu'aucun Guinéen, parce que par le passé, on a constaté beaucoup de Guinéens qui ont perdu la vie dans l'exercice de leurs droits et dans l'exercice de leur liberté. Il fallait que cela finisse. Il y a une constitution qui a été promise, la conduite des recensements, la réconciliation nationale, l'organisation d'élections libres, transparentes et crédibles, et surtout, qu'aucun membre du CNRD, aucun membre du gouvernement et du CNT ne serait candidat aux élections mettant fin à cette période transitoire. Voilà, résumé, ce que la junte avait promis aux Guinéens en arrivant il y a 4 ans. Mais qu'est-ce que nous avons constaté 4 ans après? Premièrement, il y a eu interdiction de toute manifestation, sauf les manifestations, bien entendu, en faveur du CNRD, en faveur du gouvernement. Et aujourd'hui, nous avons déjà compté des dizaines, environ une cinquantaine de personnes qui ont perdu la vie dans l'exercice de leurs droits, dans l'exercice de leur liberté. Les partis politiques, il y en a qui ont été dissous, il y a d'autres qui sont en observation. Il y a eu fermeture de tous les médias les plus écoutés. Espace a payé les frais, Dioma a payé les frais, Film a payé les frais. Aujourd'hui, le seul média de grande écoute dans le pays, c'est le média de service public qui fait la propagande, n'est-ce pas, du gouvernement. Il y a plusieurs, donc il y a des disparitions forcées, ça c'est nouveau dans l'espace politique guinéen. Il y a déjà assez d'acteurs qui sont portés, disparus depuis plus d'un an, certains. C'est le cas d'Oumar Silla, un activiste. C'est le cas de Biloba. C'est le cas de Habib Marwan Kamara, qui est un journaliste. Sadou Nimagan, Kouyaté. La liste ne fait que s'allonger. Il y a également les kidnappings. C'est aussi nouveau dans le contexte guinéen. Plusieurs personnes sont kidnappées, torturées, jetées. Le cas de Abdoul Sako, par exemple, Maître Mohamed Traoré, un ancien bâtonnier. Alors, il y a une campagne sous fond de corruption généralisée parce que désormais, il y a un changement par rapport à l'engagement du départ que ni aucun membre du CNRD, du gouvernement ou du CNT ne serait candidat aux élections prochaines. Aujourd'hui, tout le gouvernement fait campagne pour l'élection du général Mamadi Doumbouya. Et toutes les voix critiques de l'action du gouvernement sont muselées, sont traquées. Moi qui vous parle, leader politique, je suis actuellement menacé. C'est mes militants. Donc, personnellement, ma sécurité aujourd'hui, je la dois à mes militants qui passent la nuit chez moi, dans ma résidence, pour assurer ma sécurité. Plusieurs leaders politiques, n'est-ce pas, les plus populaires du pays, sont à l'extérieur. C'est le cas de Cellou Dalein, c'est le cas de Sidia Touré, tous actuellement en Côte d'Ivoire. Et donc, toutes les voix critiques, n'est-ce pas, sont menacées. Et personnellement, beaucoup de personnes me conseillent de quitter le pays et c'est le vœu des membres du CNRD, du gouvernement, mais comme je leur ai dit, je ne quitterai pas la Guinée, sinon je ne mérite pas de diriger ce pays si je dois partir parce que ma vie est menacée. La commission électorale nationale indépendante qui devait organiser toutes les élections a été dissoute. À la place, on a créé une direction générale des élections dont la directrice a été nommée hier. Et donc, le projet de nouvelle constitution, n'est-ce pas, qui est muette sur toutes les dispositions qui empêchent, n'est-ce pas, l'élection, la candidature des membres du CNRD, des membres du gouvernement et des membres du CNT, hein, cette nouvelle constitution, ce projet est muette sur tous ces aspects. Alors, c'est le contexte dans lequel la Guinée vit actuellement et la Guinée avance vers, n'est-ce pas, ce référendum. On vient d'avoir un fichier électoral, une liste provisoire, dont le recensement a connu beaucoup d'irrégularités. L'une des choses que mon parti a d'ailleurs dénoncées, c'est la répartition inégale des kits. La région la plus peuplée en Guinée, on n'a pas besoin d'avoir été à l'école pour le comprendre, c'est la région de Conakry. Mais les résultats qu'on nous a montrés des chiffres, c'est la région d'origine du président actuel de la transition qui est la plus peuplée dans notre pays. Tout cela montre que la fraude est en train déjà de prendre place. Les Guinéens ont peur, et c'est la peur qui est la caractéristique principale, n'est-ce pas, aujourd'hui des Guinéens. Hein? Tous ceux qui prennent la parole pour critiquer le pouvoir préfèrent quitter le pays. Donc, c'est un peu le contexte dans lequel nous sommes. Est-ce que les Guinéens sont prêts à aller à une élection? Oui, certains iront à une élection parce qu'il y a des billets de banque qui circulent dans une situation où tous les Guinéens tirent le diable par la queue.
Yeah. Merci beaucoup, Fayed. This is very interesting, and I really want to thank you for not only the courage to share some of these realities from the ground with us, but also to kind of shed more light on those informations that we may not have access to, being outside the context. From your feedback, it's clear that nothing much has changed with regards to our preparations towards elections, particularly the inclusivity of all the various stakeholders, and also ensuring that the electoral parameters, institutions and the likes bring on board all necessary actors. And it seems from your submission that the context is not that conducive for an inclusive, credible elections yet. So I'll come back to you, but thank you so much for sharing that. Now I want to move to Cameroon very quickly. And Cameroon today presents a significant political paradox. We have President Paul Biya, who has been in power since 1982 and is currently seeking a ninth term at the age of 92. This situation raises critical questions about the state of democracy in Cameroon and the kind of influence that certain actors within the political arena have in the country. Dr. Ngala, I think my first question to you is, or let me put it this way, is it safe to say that the prolonged presidency of Paul Biya is a concerning trend of political stagnation and a lack of genuine democratic process in Cameroon? What are the facts? What is keeping the president, President Paul Biya, in power? I mean, I want to believe that at 92, certain factors should be clear that it's no longer normal, to function effectively in that position. But I believe you have some information that we may not have, considering the fact, we are outside. What are the facts keeping the president in power? I recently saw, I think a couple of days ago, a group of young people, well-wishers, mobilizing resources, using democratic processes to reinstall autocracy, if you like, mobilizing resources to, I think, make a payment for President Biya's electoral form, something around that. But the question is, from where you sit, what are the factors keeping the president in power 40 something years after? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Olare, and thank you to the amazing panelists that come before me. You always think you know it until you meet people who live the realities in these countries. And I'm particularly delighted to be part of this webinar, not only because it's crucial for Cameroon at this time. Just so you know, Biya has been in power for more than I have been alive. This is not a joke. I was born way before 1982, but he's seeking an 8th term in office. He's 92, and biologically, you cannot say at 92 you would have all the capacities to do this. And just so you know, in the past 5 to 6 years, the country's been governed through a delegation of signature, which is the president has given a signature to the Secretary General, who is not the vice president. Constitutionally, this do not figure anywhere within this. And I'm happy that I was reading earlier comments and I saw people from Bamenda in Cameroon and Douala. So I saw Philip Nanga also here, who works in the economic city of Douala. Your question as to what's been keeping the president, I think it's this is the case study of Africa. This is the only case study where we can hold a webinar and just power through. I think institutionally, Cameroon is designed to keep one person in power. The election management body, all systems that run, being appointed by the president. So we have an election committee where we've seen former governors elected by Biya who go on retirement, now head this commission. We've had the Constitutional Council that validates this. These have been former magistrates that have been appointed. former magistrate, not just magistrates, but those we knew were loyalists to this. So institutionally, we would see this play around. And even at the level of the election management body, it's rendered flat-footed because you don't have money. Government gives you money. So as government gives you money, decides when to give the money and how to give you that money. I'm a member of the consultative Bureau of Elections in Cameroon, where we meet with different stakeholders from a youth and civil society perspective, and we keep telling them that this is very, very big, a very big problem. The second one will be what I would call structural biases, and you mentioned this in your introductory comment. This will be access to voting. So if you're following the political tension in Cameroon now, it's about the fact that if you don't have representatives, if a political party does not have representatives either in parliament or in different councils, you cannot stand for elections. You can't stand. But interestingly, the political parties have been weakened because they're controlled by the state. And every now and then you see the government saying, oh, we recognize this person as the leader of the political party. So the main opposition leader, Professor Maurice Kamto, he was a member of government, left and created his own party. There's been talk of he will not be able to run because he boycotted the legislative and local elections of 2020. And now he's gotten another party to actually endorse him. And what we're seeing recently has been that there is talk lots on social media and even on mainstream media of a potential change because this party is led by two different persons. And only one of the persons did. So you'll see he will not be able, maybe, it's going to be very challenging, might not even be able. This is just talk out there. But again, I consider this as testing the waters to see what the public reacts to it before real actions are taken. Yes, I will tell you, you mentioned also the Anglophone problem, which has become a conflict that is forgotten. I tell you, even in Cameroon, it's underreported. Be it the French or the English media is highly and hyper underreported. A week does not go by in which we have less than 10 people who were killed. But I tell you, no one is talking about these things. I am Anglophone. I come from the English-speaking part of Cameroon. I work and live in the French-speaking part, and I've been living here for over close to 2 decades now. So I understand the dynamics very, very well, being from one part of the country and living in another. So I can give you what happened. And access to polls will be something. I tell you, when I go back home, I don't travel at times with my voter's card because separatist fighters always tell you if you have a voter's card, it means you want to actually legitimize elections. At times, they actually pick you up, they take your identity card, and then they chop it off because they consider that this is what is going to help you to go. The conflict is enlisted, and what has happened now is those who can vote in these regions are government loyalists because they're going to send the military to guard you to go vote. And because these persons can easily go vote, you who have a contrary opinion we've had people who've criticized the government being picked up the next day. We were hearing the case from Guinea, picked up on fallacious claims that they are inciting rebellion. Just yesterday, we've seen a warrant of arrest for one of former member of the ruling party who, she's from the north, who got up and said, look, enough is enough. We can't actually lie to the president that he's governor. And he's been making audio messages and sharing across social media, calling out ministers and telling them that you're thieves, you're not helping the country develop and stuff like that. And just yesterday, we saw the police issue a warrant of arrest for her, and the motive is incitement to rebellion. So they're inciting people to rebellion. I know I have 5 minutes. I have 2 other points I want to quickly run through before we take it out. The next one is, I would tell you, youth apathy and what I would call voter apathy, but mostly within the youths. I don't know if the Cameroonians listening to me here, I tried to check on the chat and I saw lots of people whom we shared the links with them and they hear, so they would correct me. We have this famous saying in Cameroon, même si je vote, ça change rien. So even if I vote, it changes nothing. But I tell you that this has been because of what's happening. We are hearing and getting claims of people saying, look, even if we vote, the machinery in place is going to change. I am always very solution oriented, and I always tell people, look, it's not about saying, look, we will vote or we will not vote, it changes nothing. We need to go out there and vote first, and then we can defend this vote. So politically, it's people gotten discouraged in the system. And voices that start to be very critical about the regime start to pull crowds, are easily co-opted into government ranks, and you see them appointed. So don't be surprised if I talk too much and I get appointed as a member of some structure within the government, so much so that I cannot be able to criticize the same system that I work for. And they actually cut off the brilliant heads and go and take them away. I think a friend is running as a presidential candidate, Ateki Seta Caxton, who is a young person. And this is the question we're throwing to him. Are you just putting yourself out there so that you actually be picked up and then put out there so we see? And the last point I would want to put it here will be the regional context. I tell you, when we sit in Cameroon and look at what is happening in Central Africa, just definitely before now, the violence happening there, when we used to look at what is happening in Chad, when we used to look at what is happening in Congo, we used to say, no, look, it's better to have Biya in power and then have the security and have whatsoever we will enjoy. And Cameroon was like, yeah, this is the oasis of peace and the hinge of Africa, trying to disperse ideas. But I tell you that this has all been watered down by one, Anti-Baka and Seleka rebels coming from the eastern parts of the country, two, the Boko Haram incursions that I know people from Nigeria like you will know, and three, the conflict within the Northwest and Southwest, and finally, the socio-political conflicts that have never gone away after the 2018 presidential elections. I tell you, if we want to talk about Cameroon, we need a whole webinar just to understand the dynamics of what's happening. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Desmond. And honestly, as distrusting as this sounds, it really makes me to begin to think about how did we even get here in the first place? And recently we were having conversation about having, paying attention to strong institutions or to strong men. Which one should we deal with? But when we look at the Cameroons, the Uganda of this world, and the likes, it's a bittersweet, kind of situation. But from the feedback that you have shared with us, it seems that we should not expect something different, anything different from the forthcoming elections with regards to institutional, structural, political party, civic space, or even the crisis situation. But I will come back to you in a few minutes. Another interesting country that we'd like to, just go right into now is Cote d'Ivoire. And I have my sister here, Pucheri, who will be giving us some insight. It's really interesting that we have a regional bloc who has zero tolerance to unconstitutional change of government or even constitutional manipulation or tenure elongation. But here we are in Cote d'Ivoire, we have President Ouattara, who recently declared his candidacy for the fourth term. And the system has tactically disqualified all the potential, opposition leaders, including the former president, Laurent Gbagbo. This has been a recurrent pattern. We saw this in 2010, 2015, 2020, and now we are in 2025. So, Pocheri, how is the candidacy of President Ouattara shaping electoral preparation, integrity of the polls, if you like, inclusion, credibility, and general electoral climate in Cote d'Ivoire? I mean, we are just a few weeks away to the election. How is, declaration to run shaping all of this together? If you can share with us in 5 minutes, you have the floor.
OK, merci beaucoup. Je salue tout le monde et je remercie les organisateurs pour nous avoir invités à participer à cette conférence. Donc, je vais essayer d'aller à l'essentiel. Dans 3 mois, nous allons à des élections présidentielles Et chaque fois qu'il y a élection désormais en Côte d'Ivoire, les Ivoiriens sont vraiment dans l'angoisse. D'abord, je me représente, je suis Pulchérie Balé, présidente de Alternative citoyenne ivoirienne, qui est une plateforme de la société civile. Donc, dans quel contexte allons-nous à ces élections? Le contexte pour nous est très inquiétant parce que malheureusement, dans notre pays, aucun principe démocratique n'est respecté. Déjà, le président actuel est en train de faire un troisième mandat, contrairement à notre constitution. Et pour avoir contesté cela, nous autres, nous avons fait la prison. Donc, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Il se passe que dans notre pays, l'égalité et les droits de la personne ne sont pas respectés. Ce sont les partisans du parti au pouvoir qui ont les privilèges qui sont prioritaires sur tout. Les institutions elles-mêmes sont entièrement dirigées par les membres du parti au pouvoir, ce qui fait que la séparation des pouvoirs, qui est un principe démocratique important, n'est pas respectée en Côte d'Ivoire. L'exécutif tout entier est dirigé par le parti au pouvoir, toutes les institutions, tous les postes importants de l'administration publique sont occupés par les partisans du parti au pouvoir. À l'Assemblée nationale, étant donné que nos élections ne sont jamais justes et transparentes, le parti au pouvoir s'est taillé encore la part du loup en faisant le découpage électoral en leur faveur. On a un découpage électoral très déséquilibré qui leur a donné l'avantage, donc ils sont majoritaires, ce qui fait que l'Assemblée nationale n'est qu'une caisse de résonance de l'exécutif. La justice également est instrumentalisée. Nous allons parler beaucoup plus de la justice quand nous allons arriver sur l'état de droit. Donc, je disais que l'égalité et les droits de la personne ne sont pas respectés. La liberté d'expression, encore moins. Mais ça aussi, on va en parler dans l'état de droit. Par rapport aux élections libres et transparentes, nous avons deux organes qui organisent les élections. Il y a la commission électorale indépendante qui organise l'élection et il y a le Conseil constitutionnel qui est le juge des élections. Malheureusement, la commission électorale indépendante n'est pas réellement indépendante. Elle est composée de plusieurs entités. On a les partis politiques, on a la société civile, on a le barreau, on a le conseil de la magistrature. Et malheureusement, quand on fait le compte, la majorité des membres de la commission électorale sont proches du pouvoir. Vous avez un représentant du président de la République, un représentant du ministère de l'Intérieur qui est au parti au pouvoir, du ministre de l'Intérieur plutôt qui est du parti au pouvoir. Les représentants de la société civile, bien qu'étant de la société civile, nous ne savons pas comment ils ont été désignés. Donc, on considère qu'ils sont aussi proches du parti au pouvoir. Le représentant du barreau, le représentant du conseil de la magistrature, qui est le président actuel de la CEI, a participé avant à la rébellion, donc il est proche du parti au pouvoir. Donc vous voyez que l'opposition est minoritaire. On a 3 représentants du parti au pouvoir, donc il n'y a que les 3 représentants de l'opposition. Et actuellement où je vous parle, il y a 2 représentants de l'opposition qui sont sortis de la commission électorale, notamment le représentant du parti du président Laurent Gbagbo et le représentant du parti du président Thiam. Ce qui fait que la CEI, qui était déjà déséquilibrée, est encore plus déséquilibrée avec ces 2 représentants de l'opposition qui en sont sortis. En ce qui concerne le Conseil constitutionnel, tous les membres sont nommés par le président de la République. Donc, vous comprenez aussi que ce n'est pas un Conseil constitutionnel qui est crédible. Donc, c'est pour vous dire que pour des élections libres et équitables qui devaient garantir la démocratie, nous sommes très mal partis en Côte d'Ivoire parce que toutes nos crises électorales sont parties des organes qui organisent les élections. Pour preuve, en 2010, la commission électorale indépendante est allée proclamer les résultats provisoires au QG d'un des candidats, notamment au QG du président Alassane Ouattara. Donc aujourd'hui, personne, ni la société civile, ni l'opposition n'a confiance en cette commission électorale indépendante qui travaille pour le parti au pouvoir. Un autre exemple qui montre que cette commission ne travaille pas comme il se doit, dans le code électoral, l'article 6 nous dit qu'il faut organiser la révision de la liste électorale annuellement. Et nous tous, nous savons qu'une année janvier au 31 décembre. Donc, la CEI, la Commission électorale, a la latitude d'organiser la révision de la liste dans cette période. Malheureusement, depuis 3 révisions, elle fait les révisions à cheval sur 2 années. De sorte que, malgré le budget qui est voté à l'Assemblée nationale pour les révisions annuelles, on assiste à des révisions à cheval sur 2 années. Et encore cette fois-ci, malgré le fait que l'élection de 2025 a des enjeux importants, la CEI s'est permis de ne pas programmer de révision de la liste électorale en 2025. Alors que si elle l'avait fait, non seulement ça allait corriger tous les biais de la révision de 2024, il a été radié parce qu'au moment où il participait à la révision de 2024, il avait la double nationalité. C'était en octobre 2024. Maintenant, en mars 2025, il s'est déchu de sa nationalité française. Donc, si en 2025, il y avait une révision de la liste comme indiqué dans le code électoral, il aurait pu se présenter. Donc, vous voyez que nous sommes dans un pays où on ne respecte ni la Constitution, ni les lois qui existent, mais pire, on prend des lois anticonstitutionnelles. Je vous donne un exemple. L'article 20 de notre Constitution.
Let me stop you there, just so we have, I'll come back to you because you have started answering the next questions I have for you. But we need to manage time just so I could have, a second feedback from our speakers before we round off the conversation. I want to move on very quickly to and thank you so much for giving us that context, which, pretty much align with what colleagues have said for Cameroon and Guinea, talking about the different reforms that ought to take place, which hadn't happened, and how it's going to be challenging for elections to hold within this context, with different levels of exclusions already manifesting. I want to come to you, Aisha. Aisha, I mean, you've listened to colleagues, sharing insight from their respective countries. There've been colleagues have shared with us the growing apathy on electoral participation, and they have talked about shrinking civic space, different levels of disappointment, insecurity, and zero accountabilities from political leaders, and how I would add a state hijack, if you like, within our respective state. I don't know. I mean, I understand the work that you do and that your organization does that you mentioned. Listening to all of these, do you think, and I want to really start this solution conversation from you. Where do we go from where? How do you think? What are the strategies? How do you think we can revive or rebuild our democratic narratives, to just have things revigorated, especially the apathy part? People are not willing to go. You heard what colleagues from Cameroon said, the vote changed nothing. So why should I vote? And this pretty much it's a recurring song across the different countries. Even in places like Nigeria, very few people are looking forward to the forthcoming election in another 2 years. Cameroon, you heard what Puchere just said. The ground is not leveled or encouraging for citizens to want to participate in electoral processes or even contribute to democratic governance because they believe it's been hijacked by a certain class of people and it should just be left there. Do you think we have a chance to rewrite, review, reform, rebuild, our democratic narrative, institutions? How do we increase general civic accountability and participation? Can you just share a few thoughts with us in another couple of
Yes, I'll do that. What a loaded question, but a very important one. And I want to thank the rest of the panelists who also came with some very important insights. I remember when WACPoDIS had sent the guiding questions about the state of democracy and some of the barriers that we face in the West African region. So when we're talking about credible elections, it's important that we first of all agree on what a credible election looks like, particularly in our context. We know that credible elections, even in the country that I come from, the Gambia, it is more and beyond casting ballots. It is about creating a system, a process that is trustworthy, that is transparent, that has rules, and that's also the entire outcome of it is centered around integrity. It means that voters, citizens feel that they're confident that their votes will count. This also includes young people. It is the belief in the institutions that are here to carry out the elections, from the election commissions to the courts to the election observers. All of these institutions, we need to feel confident that they are functioning independently. And we can say that in the West African region, and from what I've also heard from our panelists, is that credible elections also means that citizens are making informed choices. So in order for them to make informed choices, the stakeholders, so the politicians that are engaging in the electoral process, need to make sure that they're compliant with the law. And we know that in the West African region, and I think it's not alien to us, but because we're talking about the West African region, we know that these are some of the pain points that we have in our electoral processes. When we look at the country that I am from, the Gambia, we have a very long electoral process, in the sense that our election starts in next year in 2026, we have presidential elections. And then after the presidential elections, we have the parliamentary elections. And then a year after, we have the mayoral and council elections. And then we have the mayoral and councillors, they're separate. So we have about 5 electoral elections during a 5-year period. It creates a system where the cycle can be interrupted. It creates a lot of insecurity in our election process also. And the main issue that we're also facing in the Gambia, and I think a lot of us in the West African region can relate to this, is the fact that we are navigating in a way in which we're talking about credible elections, we're talking about democracy, but our laws are outdated. It is very difficult for us to be compliant with laws that are centered, the ethos about democratic values and making sure that we have electoral commissions and the courts and the institutions are adhering to democracy, and the strategies also need to center that. But how do you implement something that the law is not in alignment with? Going back to the Gambia, we know that, as you mentioned in your opening, Omo, in 2016, we had a coalition. We got rid of an authoritarian government for 22 years, Yahya Jammeh. We had a transitional president that was supposed to be here for 3 years. That 3 years became 5 years. That 5 years has now become 10 years. And that 10 years can now become a potential 15 years because he's running for a 3rd term. Now, civil society is saying you cannot run for a 3rd term because the constitution, the draft constitution that we had term limits, and those term limits say 2 terms, which is 10 years. You have done your time. But we don't have a constitution in the Gambia. We're still navigating with the constitutions of 1996, which was the constitution that Yahya Jammeh brought forth. We've had constitutional review just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it was not passed in Parliament with our 2024 draft. Before the 2024 draft, we had the 2020 draft that was also not passed. And going back to your question, Omo, of where does this leave young people? I think that it leaves young people frustrated. I think it leaves young people, and not just young people, I think any members in society that have seen so much investment that has been put into democratic spaces in West Africa, particularly in the Gambia. We have funders who have come in and put a lot of money in terms of sensitizing the people. We've gone to all of the regions of the Gambia, civic education, all of that has happened. But now they're saying, well, all of that investment, there's not a lot of return. We're still in the same situation. We're still seeing the same institutions. We're still seeing the same laws. And this has caused us to not trust and believe in the process. And not just that, when we are looking globally outside of our West African region, outside of our continent, we know that democracy is being threatened. We're seeing the elite, regardless of where they are, whether it's in the Gambia, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Cote d'Ivoire, whether it's in Cameroon, whether it's in America, whether it's in the UK, we're seeing the same trend of an elite group of people who set the agenda and decide what's going to happen in their respective countries, even when it undermines democracy, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's, it's something that we're all witnessing. And what that causes, it causes the entire process to be dismantled in a sense, because people are not believing in democracy in the way in which we have. And that's the big elephant in the room. Democracy is a very important process. We all know that it has its flaws, but we know it's the better choice, right? And we can get into it. Maybe some might think otherwise. But I mean, what we are seeing is that democracy throughout the entire world is being challenged. And this is an issue that we're having. And this is an issue that young people can feel. And especially in our context, you feel it more. Because when you're in a context where you don't even have your hygiene needs, a bag of rice is very expensive. You cannot buy a bag of rice and oil and sugar. Even in my country, sometimes buying eggs is a privilege. Can you imagine that? Having mayonnaise is a privilege because of the high living costs and the low salaries that people are having. So in our contexts, it creates even we are more vulnerable, that people are not necessarily so interested in democracy, but they're interested in, I want to survive. So when we in Gambia are soon going to have our elections starting, we start with the nominations, right? Then we have voter registration is the first. Then we have nomination, then we have campaigning, and then elections day. When we get to the voter registration, if I am in a remote village, and a politician comes to me and says, go and get your voter's card, and I'm going to give you a bag of rice every month until elections day. These are the things that create unfortunately, our context, our situations are also a threat to us because people want to survive. And when you want to survive, you're not at a privileged state to look at the long term. You're looking at the short term of how do I feed my children? How do I feed myself? How do I feed my community? And politicians have been very good at understanding the situation and the context in which their citizens are in, and they cater to their needs. That's what they do. Now it's time that civil society and other actors cater to those needs on a more systematic, structural, and look at the entire ecosystem. And that's where it comes from my perspective. I think that a lot of the things that we need to focus on when we're looking at elections credibility, when we're looking at, citizens fatigue, we need to go down at looking at the systems that are in place, the structures that are in place. Why is it that folks are making those choices? Can people, even if you can make informed choices, is it fair to ask somebody to make that choice? Can they afford to make that choice? Because making an informed choice is actually also a privilege. We must acknowledge that too. Right?
Yeah.
We've seen this in many, many contexts. So just to wrap it up, I know that we are running out of time. I want to say that when we're rebuilding the narrative of democracy, when we are looking at elections, we're not just looking at voters, we're looking at many stakeholders. It's the international community, it's civil society, it's the religious leaders. There's so many people in that ecosystem, but we need to look at the system that has failed to protect or represent them. And the system is not necessarily just elections. It is the entire ecosystem of governance in our regions that caused this pivotal moment of the decision of who leads us as countries. And we need to really look at how we can really harness our collective efforts to address all of those things that create this pattern that we're seeing on elections day. Why is it that this is continuously happening? It's because we just don't have enough, and people are not able to, make those decisions. Yeah. So that's it for me. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And I think I particularly appreciate you using the Gambia to really drive home some of this insights that you've shared with us. The Gambia holds a very special space in my heart, by the way, and it's quite painful to see how slow the progress has been since the achievement of 2017, the removal of Yahya Jammeh, and to see what, our most celebrated coalition had turned to. But you've really hit some important points around moving beyond electoral democracy, if we really want to improve, or reduce, the level of apathy people need to have access to the fundamentals. Without that, whoever pays the piper, we always dictate the tune. And I think that's the summary of what you're saying, paying attention to the systematic, operational, and structural challenges that disenfranchise people or, that kind of determine people's choices beyond outside what is right or what you consider to be beneficial to them. I think this is really important. And to a long extent, I should say that if these challenges are addressed, it's also going to strengthen our civic space. Thank you so much. I need to come back to speakers now. We have about 30 minutes to round up. So please permit me, when I call on you, I will just give you 2 minutes to give us those recommendations, strategies, ideas to address some of the issues that we have, brought to the fore in the past 1 hour, 20 minutes. And I'm going to start with my brother from Cameroon. I mean, what is happening in Cameroon? So I understand, like I said, it's a paradox, but it's not so different from what we are experiencing in other countries. So very quickly for me, as a civil society person, as a pro-democracy actors, what if you are to list 2, 3 fundamentals that should be addressed before the next elections, whether it's internal, external, or any specific role to for international communities, what would those 3 fundamentals be? Are there 3? What are the 3 things that you think, if we are able to touch on them, we could see a different outcome in the next elections? I mean, we have few weeks to the elections, but let's hear from you. You have 2 minutes, Desmond. So I'm going to move to my brother from Guinea. This is Fafa, Dr. Fafa. I'm aware that the ECOWAS protocols forbids unconstitutional change of power, of government. And where it does happen, the protocol on democracy and good governance, the supplementary protocol, I think 2006 or 2001, says that whoever comes to power via unconstitutional means would not be allowed to transition into the next democracy. I mean, this is just me paraphrasing, but that's what it says. This is a dilemma for Guinea because from the optics, General Doumbouya seems to be willing to run for elections comes December. And so the question is, what can you share with us in your own thoughts and as your your own insight? How do you think the opposition parties and other stakeholders react to this reality in a situation where ECOWAS doesn't endorse, the general to run, and if the general insists on running, which would more likely be the case, what kind of reaction should we expect from Guineans, from the opposition party in Guinea, from civil society? And are there 1 or 2 strategies that you think we should be advocating for now to ensure a free, fair, credible, and transparent elections, considering the context you shared with us earlier? What are the chances that we have? You have 2 minutes very quickly. If you can just give us those points, and we can take note of them in the report that will be widely disseminated for colleagues to use as advocacy tool. Dr. Fafa, you have 2 minutes.
Alors, ce que je vais dire brièvement, c'est que la situation dans laquelle nous nous trouvons en Guinée, M. Doumbouya est déjà prêt pour être le prochain candidat. Tout le gouvernement est en campagne pour l'imposer au peuple de Guinée. Les Guinéens ont fini par comprendre que le CNRD, qui est arrivé le 5 septembre, n'avait qu'une seule intention, confisquer le pouvoir. Aujourd'hui, lorsqu'on a empêché même l'ancien Premier ministre qui est actuellement en Côte d'Ivoire de s'enrôler, d'être sur la liste électorale, on voit clairement qu'on ne veut pas, pour ces élections-là, des candidats qui peuvent faire ombrage, n'est-ce pas, au général Mamadi Doumbouya. Le général Mamadi Doumbouya n'a aucune popularité parce que les Guinéens ont simplement peur. Sinon, beaucoup de Guinéens prendraient la parole aujourd'hui pour dépeindre la situation. Mais quiconque ose prendre la parole, eh bien, vous pouvez faire face à une situation de kidnapping où vous allez être torturé et jeté. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire maintenant? La CEDEAO doit élever le ton. Parce que ce que nous constatons de l'intérieur, c'est que c'est comme si les chefs d'État de la sous-région ouest-africaine ont déjà concédé que le prochain président qui sera imposé au peuple de Guinée s'appelle Mamadi Doumbouya et ils sont prêts à coopérer avec lui. Or, le faire, c'est mettre en danger toute la région ouest-africaine. La Guinée a la frontière avec 6 autres pays. Si un conflit devait commencer en Guinée, ça déstabilisera la presque totalité de ce qui reste, n'est-ce pas, de la CEDEAO. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Premièrement, la CEDEAO doit élever le ton pour dire clairement à la junte que les élections prochaines, Mamadi Doumbouya ne doit pas être candidat, aucun membre de son CNRD ne doit être candidat comme eux-mêmes s'étaient engagés de le faire. Deuxièmement, il faut qu'une CENI, c'est-à-dire une commission électorale nationale indépendante, soit mise en place. Aujourd'hui, on a aménagé une direction générale, on a nommé une dame très zélée qui est prête à déclarer Mamadi Doumbouya avant même qu'on commence le comptage des élections. Alors, donc, il faut que la CENI soit mise en place. La troisième chose, n'est-ce pas, c'est du côté des partis politiques. De ce côté-là, je peux vous dire que nous sommes en train de nous organiser. Parce qu'après tout, beaucoup de partis politiques les plus significatifs du pays ont déjà rejeté le projet de constitution. Les forces vives de Guinée ont déjà rejeté cette fameuse constitution. Et beaucoup d'autres acteurs politiques et sociaux ont déjà rejeté ce fameux projet de constitution. Donc, nous sommes en train de nous organiser. Si la CEDEAO essaye de jouer son rôle, nous prendrons nos dispositions pour empêcher effectivement la confiscation du pouvoir dans notre pays qui pourrait, n'est-ce pas, nous conduire à un conflit qui pourrait affecter toute la région ouest-africaine.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insight. And I think I align with your call on ECOWAS, and we're hoping that ECOWAS will step in. I have an idea of the kind of interventions that ECOWAS has recently made in Guinea, but it's also important, like you rightly said, it's important to note that it is a dilemma for ECOWAS itself, because out of the 4 countries currently under military rule, Guinea has shown more cooperation with the bloc, and so it's a bitter twist one for ECOWAS as well. So we can come back to that if our time permits. Otherwise, it's something that I would like to unpack further in future conversations, and same with the situation in the Gambia. Just for me to give the floor, I have 2 ants in the room now, and I still have 3 speakers to pick on, which I think I'm definitely going to. But very quickly, I see Musa, unmute yourself. You have 1 minute.
Thank you for having me. And actually, this conversation is actually burning and topical as it relates to development across Africa with regard to election. But as a way of enriching the discussion, I just want to make some quick clarification. And these clarifications are actually germane because there are differences between, armchair observation and the report that are actually contextual and situational. First is to look at the contribution with regard to Funto's suggestion in comparison between Nigeria and Guinea as a way of showing progress and retrogression in terms of democracy. And when you align with the submission, you will realize that countries on that transition, the democracy in terms of Nigeria, when you look at it in terms of repression, Nigeria's experience is actually maturing. It is maturing if you look at it at a regional level. When you look at Nigeria's support to issues around commitment to restoring democracy, which I will align that submission with Aisha's submission regarding the issue of institutions working independently. You will agree with me that democracy itself and good governance, for us to entrench it, you need to look at what we have as a synergy between systems. That is to tell you that institutions cannot work independently. And for the fact that these institutions cannot work dependently, they actually require some collaboration. Funto made a critical observation regarding electoral funding and electoral management body. You will agree with me that in terms of progression, the Nigeria's experience when it comes to funding, there is autonomous funding for election management body in Nigeria. Now,
okay, Musa, I think I'm going to stop you there just so I can give room to others. I still have my speakers in the room yet to make their second submission. So if you can drop the full comment in the chat, I'm going to take time to read them, but I don't want to lose my speakers. But thank you so much. I think you made a point around the need for some level of collaborations among institutions, particularly citing examples from Nigeria, which is key for democratic development. Thank you. That is noted. Thank you so much. Now, let me go back to my speaker. And I think I'm not going to pick Funto now. Let me come back to Tambajan. Aisha, very quickly, I just want you to give us, your final insight based on this question. So I am familiar with the work you do at Momentum, and I just want to ask if there are other forms of recommendations that you can share, maybe one or two that would really help us to rebuild the resilience to democratic retrogression. And pardon me, I think Funto gave them some nice names. Slow development.
First of all, you said my last name.
Terminologies. There are some of these terminologies where the democratic retrogression, decline, and all of that. So, Funto, thank you so much. Now, I've learned a lot. How can we build resilience to some of the emerging issues we are seeing, the retrogression, continuous threat to civic space, and geopolitical influence that continue to shape the direction of our democracy? One or 2 points, we'll be happy to have it from you. Over to you, Aisha.
So first, I will say reform is essential. And in this context, electoral reform is very important. In many of our countries, the legal and institutional frameworks guiding elections are outdated, so they're very easily manipulated. We need reform that strengthens the independence of electoral processes. This comes from introducing campaign finance accountability and ensuring inclusive processes that do not just invite participation, but protects it. So that's key, the protection of democracy. And then also electoral process, looking at it as it's not just about the voting procedures, but it's about building confidence in the entire system. Secondly, I'll quickly also say that I think we need to move away from ad hoc civic engagement and move more towards building a democratic ecosystem. So too often we see civic actors that are doing amazing work, but the support is only leading up to elections, and then it's left to operate in silos. So there's we know that there are a lot of things. There's under-resourcement, there's political vulnerability, but what we need to do as civil society, we need to think about more long-term mitigation or interventions. We need to look at, from the donor's perspective, flexible funding for civil society. We need to look at youth-led, women-led organization and allow them to also be part of these processes in terms of also monitoring the power that's engaged in civil society, and also ensuring that civic spaces are not only active around electoral moments, but also continuously are building the ecosystem that is important. It's more than election day and campaigning and all of that. Thirdly, quickly, Omo, I would also say we need to reclaim the civic narrative. I think we've talked a lot about misinformation and disinformation, and rightly so, but I think one of the most dangerous outcomes of all of this is not just the confusion that it causes to citizens, but it's a disconnection. And you talked about this. Young people in particular are no longer inspired by the language of democracy, which is very scary. And this is because of the lived experiences that they've had. It has not delivered on its promises. So we need to co-create a civic education that is contextual, that is values-driven, that is rooted in real outcomes for young people. What do young people want? What do young people need? Jobs, safety, dignity. And we need a democracy that is visible in daily life, not just during campaign and in slogans. I also think that we need to be very intentional about protecting civic spaces, as I've talked about before. So the legal reform, upholding the freedom of expression of people, associations, but also investing in digital security. How do we counter disinformation networks? How do we protect mechanisms for journalists, for activists as tools? Some of these things are used as tools of repression. And we also need to really look at the online spaces. This is very important. And I also want to say the diaspora plays a huge role in this, especially in Africa. We know that the African diaspora, they're very much politically involved. And the diaspora sometimes can spread disinformation and misinformation. So how do we also bring them as part of our electoral processes? So as civil society, when we're thinking about elections, we cannot forget about the diaspora. In the Gambia, the diaspora has been declared to be the 8th region of the Gambia. In the AU, the diaspora has been declared as the 8th region. We cannot leave them behind because they have a lot of power in our elections, from campaigning. A lot of the incumbents, even oppositions, they get a lot of their funding from the diaspora. When you see a lot of movements that have happened, and particularly in my context in the Gambia, the diaspora were able to write about what was happening during Jammeh's 22 years. So you had whistleblowers that were sent to the diaspora and they'll put it out there. And this is what has caught international attention to what's happening in Gambia, and also some of this regional solidarity because of people in the diaspora. But this can also be used as a threat. So how do we now harness that effort? And then finally, I will say that from the discussion that we're having today, I think that regional solidarity is a non-negotiable strategy. We need to come together and beyond talking, convene. We have comrades across the continent. How do we actually leverage what we have learned in terms of the trends that we're seeing, increasing cross-border military influence, digital surveillance, foreign interference, you name it. I think that it also means that we need to leverage our regional bodies. I know we have ECOWAS, I know we have others, but not just for electoral observation, but for really democratic norm setting and accountability. So just to sum it up, I think that we need to stop treating democracy as a moment or an event. I think we need to treat it as a system of values that must be practiced, protected, adapted daily. And for it to survive in West Africa, we must root it in people's lived realities, young people's lived reality, people with disabilities' lived realities, women's lived reality. And we must give resources to those who defend it, civil society actors, and we must work across borders to really protect it together. So I will leave it there. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think these are very crisp and crystal in terms of actions that we need to take to safeguard our democracy and also make it one that delivers, to the people. Funto, I'm coming to you very quickly. And I mean, each time I look at the work that you do at IDEA, I just believe all the solutions, should, at least the majority of the solutions should emanate from the bits of work that you do, especially around electoral democracy. So I just want to ask you, we have 2 months this is July, August, September, October. We have 3 months to 2 of the elections and 4 months to the other 2. From where you sit as an expert, what is urgent? I mean, what are the urgent or critical, be it institutional, legal, where possible, or regional action that we need to explore to ensure these elections in their forms and format are inclusive, equitable, and transparent, peaceful. What are those things that we need to do? Very urgent stuff that you think if Cameroon, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guinea-Bissau can do A, B, C, D, we could have something better coming out of there. Funto, you have the next 3 minutes because this is very important. So I'm giving you 3 minutes.
The person that spoke before me, I was like, oh, I wish I could be that eloquent. But she actually raised quite a number of points that are related to, some of the things I want to say. And as you're talking about the time frames, it bothers me a lot because I wish there was so much we really could do. But I must say, if there is very little time, and if I were to, zoom in on one effort that I would say could work, will be that we leverage our multilateral institutions, our AUs, our ECOWAS. We laugh. Someone was saying ECOWAS is now what you call ECOWAS, what it was. But that does not take away the importance of these institutions. And why am I very quickly going there? There's a point you made about the fact that, are we going to have strict enforcement of the provisions of the Act this time around? And the point is that elections, we are now moving away from elections just for the sake of peace. I think across the continent, it has now become clear, that just us saying, well, it was peaceful, so let it pass. We know that that peace is for the time. If you look at the trajectory of the 3-4 countries that are now in transition. So my first point is a call on the regional institutions. Guinea's referendum should not be handled the way Gabon's was handled, where there was no clear interrogation of the constitution that was being passed. We just looked at the process of passing it, and it was just seen as one of those things. Okay, check, transition is on course. Is anyone looking through the constitution? I'll personally say I haven't interrogated the content, but what are the contentious issues that need to be discussed? The lady from Gambia made a point. Gambia has been on the discussion table for 2 years. And the critical points about the constitution, what are they? Questions around what's the importance of the diaspora? How will they vote? Are they going to be enlisted as a constituency? If they are, how will they count? Questions around that. And these are all questions that lead to what? The question of justice. We are no longer looking at elections as just a process. If elections do not give people the satisfaction of justice, of equity, and equal participation, we are still missing the point, and it will be another checkbox. But things will remain unstable. So that's my first point for the short term, the immediate things, because I am not sure, because in such repressive contexts as we are seeing in Guinea, in Cameroon, leveraging the multilateral, the international institutions, that's the first. Secondly is, like you said, not for the observation, but in terms of early engagement, continuous preventive diplomacy initiatives. Our regional courts have an important role because national judicial spaces have been captured. Let's call on citizens to take questions around justice beyond national courts, challenge some of these decisions in our regional courts. Because what we want is stable peace, not just, elections that are peaceful for the sake of it. For the countries that have longer time, we have Gambia on the call, for instance. I would say protect reform processes. That is another area. Reforms cannot continue to be captured spaces. We continue to talk about let's reform our laws. It's important to reform the laws, but within what context are we undertaking those reforms? And many countries are having reform processes that are gradually being hijacked. And by the time you get to the elections, it's already too late to be talking about issues of justice or inclusion, because the processes that led to the legal frameworks, were exclusive from the beginning. So protecting our reform spaces. The person that was making responses about election management bodies, I would also like to make a call to say, let's move beyond elections. Let's look at democracy as a broad issue. You can't have elections that are acceptable in a context where human rights are not guaranteed, where disinformation is the order of the day and money determines the way the elections go. These things are not issues just for the electoral commissions to run. These are now national questions about democracy. Finally, make a shift away from voter and civic education. Let's relabel it democracy education. We need to go back to the basics. 60% of Africa's population are young people. What have they learned about democracy? And what do we need them to unlearn? Finally, invest in local democracy. That is where democracy really starts and ends. And unfortunately, all the work of international groups and all that, we all look at national elections. Local spaces are almost non-existent. But this is where the real democracy that touches the people, that's where it is defined. And unfortunately, we've closed out that space. We've moved everything up to the national. Every time we say elections, you see, it's presidential election, it's parliamentary elections, and we lose out the essence of local democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Funto. Thank you. I think there are a number of alignments between your submissions and that of Aisha, and I'm not surprised at all. I think this reflects the spaces in which both of you operate and the kind of experiences you've gathered over the years. I want to pick two other speakers from the participant from the room, and I think I saw first Green Relief, and I'm just going to give you 1 minute before I take my very final speaker. So Green Relief, you have 1 minute. Green Relief, if you're in the room, unmute yourself. 1 minute, please. Let's hear from you. This is democracy, so participatory.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the presenters, including yourself. You guys are doing fantastic. First, I want to say that in all of our discussions, since we're discussing democracy, there's always a saying that in West Africa or in Africa, when Nigeria coughs, the rest of Africa shivers. But for 25 years, democracy has been in retrogression in Nigeria. And I see WACC as that institution or organization that can actually streamline things, can make a voice, and a lot will be respected. People's rights in Nigeria is not respected. There's retrogression in terms of people, voters apathy, contribution to democracy is going down, and that is why you see things happening around ECOWAS. Nations in ECOWAS are not doing anything. In fact, they are going down because Nigeria is going down instead of going up.
Thank you so much.
And so a lot that we really need to do as WACC, the advocacies that we have at hand, is something that we can come together, and when we speak together, it can actually work.
Thank you so much for your comment. I think this is quite interesting. The retrogression seems to, the slowness, just to borrow from Funter's concept, it seems to be everywhere. But thanks for noting that. Thank you. I want to invite Monday Yari Tama. Just 1 minute. We're trying to make this as participatory as possible.
Okay.
Monday. Yes, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I just want to draw attention to what the last speaker said, paying attention to local elections. I've come to realize that you see those legislators, those parliamentarians that we don't pay attention. Oftentimes, we only pay attention on the president. The president. We don't pay attention to those guys who formulate the laws that are supposed to strengthen our institutions. So, there is a need for us to see how we can, because there's this, bandwagon voting, where a president is on this ballot and every other, candidate under that ballot to win the election. So if there is need for us to carry out a sensitization on voter bandwagon so that people will know, why are you voting this particular candidate from your constituency, this MP, this senator? I think from there we'll be able to, because if a president have an opposition parliament, he has to work. He cannot go beyond the constitution limit, So thank you so very much, Waxy and the all speakers.
Thank you, Monday. I want to just invite Madam Ballet to just give her final remarks. Madam Ballet, the question that I want you to respond to in the next 2 minutes, because you're one of our famous speaker, is how can we ensure that the next elections, considering all the issues that you have raised, which we're very aware of, how can we ensure that the next elections, this October elections, does not lead us to what happened in 2010? How can we prevent violence and conflicts? How can we, what do we need to do? What are the boxes we need to tick to ensure that this election doesn't lead to violence? Ballots, please, if you can share with us those 2 points right now, I will be so happy.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Rapidement, comme nous sommes déjà dans un contexte de crise préélectorale avec la radiation des principaux leaders de l'opposition qui pourtant sont toujours les candidats de leur parti, avec la CEI qui est décriée, avec tout ce qu'on constate comme revendication au niveau de la société civile et de l'opposition, il y a 2 solutions qui sont possibles pour que véritablement on ait des élections apaisées. La première solution, c'est l'organisation d'un dialogue politique, un dialogue national inclusif politique. Le dernier dialogue politique, le 5e, a pris fin en mars 2022. Ça veut dire que ça fait plus de 3 ans que les acteurs politiques ne se sont pas réellement parlé. Donc, ce dialogue politique consiste à réunir tous les acteurs politiques, quel que soit leur bord, et la société civile, pour mettre sur la table les questions essentielles et trouver un consensus pour aller à ces élections. C'est aussi au cours de ce dialogue politique qu'on va décider qu'est-ce qui est possible encore alors qu'il reste encore 3 mois ou s'il faut reporter l'élection pour mieux l'organiser. La deuxième chose, c'est par rapport aux institutions internationales. L'ONU a fait une mission, l'Union africaine a fait une mission, la CEDEAO a fait une mission, mais on a besoin d'une intervention beaucoup plus active. Ils ont fait des missions, ils ont fait des constats, ils ont fait des recommandations, mais puisque le parti au pouvoir refuse d'organiser ce dialogue politique, qui est la seule voie pour trouver des solutions consensuelles, il faudrait que les institutions internationales s'impliquent davantage, faire de la prévention plutôt qu'après d'être dans le règlement des conflits. Donc, il faut que l'une des organisations internationales prenne sur elle d'inviter tous les acteurs dans un terrain neutre pour pouvoir parler avec ces acteurs et initier le dialogue politique. Voilà ce que j'ai à dire pour qu'il y ait la paix pour ces élections de 2025. Merci.
Thank you so much. So, Butchered, if you can just give us your final word before I invite other speakers. What are the final words you like to say so that I don't have to come back to you?
Je voudrais d'abord vous remercier et puis vous encourager à organiser ce genre de conférence. Ça nous permet de savoir ce qui se passe dans les autres pays et puis donc d'apprendre des expériences des autres. Et donc, c'est juste de vous féliciter. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those insights. And we'll see how the political dialogue can happen. We'll see what we can do from our side and then reach out to also colleagues and other critical stakeholders that could make this a reality. Dr. Ungala Desmond, you have the floor for your final words. Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
I would say it's been an engagement.
That's okay. Continue.
Yeah, there are lots of points which we can take from here. But looking at what's happening, I would say lots of media and information literacy programs are almost on the instant. We are 2 months, and there are kind of reforms that we cannot expect them. Legal and institutional reforms that will change these systems do not happen overnight. So I'm not going to be telling you, oh, we need to change commissions and do whatsoever. But also, lots of dialogue. I hear Cote d'Ivoire is actually also calling for this political dialogue. We've seen in other regions where political leaders come together and say, irrespective of whatever we do, please let's refrain from advocating for violence. And this is one of the things that I think we should do most, particularly in Cameroon, some an always underlooked topic, which has always been questions of division, incitement to violence, but also questions of hate speech. So I think that for us to be that inclusive, we need to do that. And lastly, I think Aisha talked about the diaspora. I'm not going to go back to what she said about the diaspora already, but I'm going to also just highlight the fact that in as much as at times we look at them as the problem because they've been socialized differently, I think that they have a massive power. They have a massive role to play in this. And why not? In most of these countries, why can't we actually just open up for a double nationality for them? I know that most of them are building houses here. They are setting up businesses. Why can't they actually decide the leaders who run those businesses? We're calling them to do businesses, but we're blocking them. I'm speaking with the case of Cameroon. So thank you so much for inviting me, Omar. It's been a pleasure to be here. And thank you to WACC for organizing this.
Thank you so much, Desmond. Thank you. Dr. Fafa, your final words. Dr. Fafa from Guinea.
Merci, merci encore une fois. Je crois qu'il y a deux choses qui peuvent être faites maintenant là avec l'aide de la CEDEAO pour sauver la paix en Guinée. Nous nous sommes rendus compte que le CNRD n'était pas venu pour résoudre un problème, mais pour confisquer le pouvoir. Tous les recours qu'ils ont commencé sous fond de lutte contre la corruption, c'était des règlements de compte. Il faut aujourd'hui qu'il soit demandé à la junte militaire guinéenne de clarifier la situation de toutes les personnes qui sont portées disparues. C'est la seule chose qui peut lutter contre, n'est-ce pas, la peur qui s'est emparée de tous les Guinéens. C'est la première chose. La deuxième chose, il faut assurer la sécurité des leaders qui sont à l'étranger, n'est-ce pas? Parce que la justice aujourd'hui est complètement instrumentalisée. Lorsque les deux conditions sont remplies, nous pouvons aller à un dialogue qui puisse permettre de créer les conditions d'une élection à laquelle tout le monde pourra participer, une élection, n'est-ce pas, qui pourrait être transparente, crédible, avec la mise en place d'une commission électorale nationale indépendante. Et encore une fois, si la CEDEAO laisse le général Doumbouya violer le traité de la CEDEAO en se présentant candidat, eh bien, je crois que cette organisation finira par disparaître.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fafa. Thank you so much. Now I'm coming to my sister, Funto, your final words.
Thank you very much. I think final would just to be to say we wish, you know, the citizens of our brothers and sisters in the country going into elections the best for that. And just to say that we need to continue to build our coalitions and our platforms, strengthen them beyond our national borders, because when we do it alone, these national restrictions that we've spoken about, and we heard it as the different contributors, you know, spoke, those restrictions will hold us back. So it is about building broader coalitions. Quite recently for us, we actually decided to do a South-South convening. So it was between Africa, Latin America, countries in Asia, to see what is civil society doing differently across these different contexts. How are questions around democracy panning out, and what should we be doing differently? Because it seems even talking amongst ourselves as Africans is gradually also, you know, not yielding the results. So as we take it further, and also to say we continue to engage our institutions, the African Union, ECOWAS, and the rest of them. They may not be performing at the optimal, but we should not lose hope, because they present great and interesting opportunities for us to take our conversations beyond national borders and hold leaders accountable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Funto. Thank you. Colleagues, please, we have a very short survey shared in the chat box just to have your feedback on this webinar, what went well and what we need to improve upon as WACC. Would like to hear your voices. So please just click the survey link. It's like 2-3 questions, and then you can help us to make the webinars better in the future. We'd really like to hear from you. Finally, my sister Aisha, your final words.
Okay, my final words, very short, but I just want to, I think my colleagues have said everything, and it goes back to, I think, Desmond, one of the points that he talked about in regards to the diaspora, and also just Olofonto's recent contribution, is that we must look outside of our borders. And I really encourage us to look at our diaspora. I think the diaspora is really one of the biggest weapons that we have, or tools, instruments that we have in Africa, and just looking at the financial, technical, and other areas in which they can support us, particularly civil society. The diaspora brings in more financial resources in remittance than any foreign assistance that the continent can get. So I think we really need to harness that effort. And also we see a lot of diasporans like myself. I am born in the diaspora, but I've moved back to the Gambia where I work now, I live now, and they want to contribute. We want to contribute. So I think it's also just extending that olive branch and finding other people who are Black Africans that want to contribute in terms of the process of liberating Africa truly. So I think that is really something that civil society can do to really bring them in more. I think that's my last contribution. And thank you, WACC, for the invitation and the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And I really want to thank every one of you, all our speakers, Dr. Ngala Desmond from Cameroon, for your contributions and for joining us. Dr. Fafa Milimono from Guinea. Thank you also for joining us for this conversation. And my sister Pucheri from Cote d'Ivoire, who is an activist from Cote d'Ivoire. Thank you so much for joining. And Aisha, who just spoke right now, she's a senior program manager at Momentum. Thank you so much also for joining. And also Funto Akinduro, who is a senior advisor at the International IDEA. Thank you for joining this conversation. I think we've pretty much tried to address the objectives of the conversation for today. Colleagues shared with us the context, the reality within their separate context, which kind of, for colleagues who have been on the call since we started, we can see the similarities in our context from state capture to shrinking civic space to democracy fragility, stalled transitions, as we've listened to from colleagues in the Gambia, Sierra Leone, and the instability around the civic space. All of these are the realities that we have across the region, and particularly in the countries that will be holding elections in the next 2 to 5 months. And we also noted the captured spaces that we currently experiencing, the judiciary, the legislative arms, the overbearing over executive powers, and of course the how the electoral monitoring body struggles with independency, and then financial resources to do their work. All of these were kind of shared by our speakers. And Cameroon also touched on the deep institutional weakness and structural biases, voter apathy, which runs across the 3 countries based on insecurity, corruption and the like. But most importantly are the things that we need to do to really ensure that we move the needle a little bit. And some of the solutions we're talking about: systematic, institutional, and legal reforms, not only around democracy, but not only around elections, but democracy generally, and then electoral reform, legal framework. We also need to move our democracy beyond electoral democracy. We need to look at it holistically, and this is where civil society has a lot of role to play, moving beyond ad hoc civic engagement to something that is more institutionalized and long-term. Having access to flexible funding, particularly at this time where the funding space seems to be fast shrinking than civic space. We need to reclaim our civic narrative and combat misinformation and disinformation. And Funto also talked about the need for us to leverage multilateral institutions to make some critical interventions, the ECOWAS, the AU, and other international partners across countries that are currently in transitions and those looking forward to elections this year. Preventive diplomacy can never be overstated. We need to employ that, and also utilizing our regional courts where the national court has denied injustices at various levels. I think these are some of the points that I noted here. We're going to put it very nicely in a simple report that every one of us can would have access to and use for forward engagement as we move on. We cannot end conversation on democracy in one day, not even in 2 hours. So I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, to all the participants for joining us, those who were able to make comments in the rooms or you had the chance to speak. Thank you for making those contributions. We will consider them in the report. So I want to just thank you and wish you a very good Thursday afternoon in your respective locations. Until we come your way next time on another series of West Africa Policy Dialogue conversation. From me, Omolara, I work here at WACC. Thank you so much and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Omo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, speakers. Funto, Aisha, Fafa, thank you so much, everyone. Our interpreters also, thank you for helping us to bridge this colonial inheritance.
Thank you, Malora. Thank you.